So we'll call us to order. That's about as organized as we'll feel maybe today. But I'm going to ask us in a few minutes to do some introductions, self-introductions, and but I want to give you an idea of just some things to know and what the agenda will be this afternoon in general. And of course, the agenda will be in part what we make of it. Our job is to work on developing a policy. So, after introductions, where I'm going to give you a hint as to what I'm going to look for, or at least what will help me. And that is, I'm going to ask for your name and any other way that you want to describe who you are. And one fun fact, I'm going to call it a fun fact today, and I'll start. So I'm going to give you some time to think about what that might be. There are bathrooms in the facility through that door and the first door on the left, and go down that hallway, they're there. We will take at least one break of about 10 minutes, about halfway through, I'm guessing, as close as we can. If there are observers, and we have one, if we have others who come in, they are to be back here, and their job is to observe and not to comment. For us, our job is to try to arrive at a policy. But we're going to need to do, in this case, a little bit more work than some of the other committees, partly because the Bennington PD, along with many other departments in the state, do not have a standardized policy regarding this topic. And I'm going to use this topic for the moment because I think that's in part what we need to do some talking with. Also, my hope is that we will spend most of our time on perfecting the purpose, the policy statement, and the definitions. The procedural part will flow from those things, and the procedure is really the task of the department. So the department will work on, the chief and others that he designates will work on the procedure. However, if as we go along you have suggestions for the chief, that's perfectly fine. We can make those suggestions. I've had a conversation about it this week, and he feels very comfortable with that process. So if we have, they're basically at that point questions and or suggestions. Where I'd like us to start, rather than diving into a document that was arrived at by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, is for us to go around the table and on the internet, and we can all see you. You're up on the big screen in front of us, guys, so we know that you're there. And I'll give each of you an opportunity to say a few things about or identify some particular concerns that you have regarding this area of police interaction with citizens of the town, so that we can hopefully address some of them, maybe all of them. That's where we'll be. Excuse me. So let's start with, and then we'll move on to the actual policy itself. So, without further ado, my name is Bruce Lee Clark. I'm a member of the Select Board and a permanent member of this committee, or as permanent as anything, yes, I suppose. For my fun fact, I am the grandfather of Wilbur George Lane, and Wilbur happens to be my father's first name and my grandfather's first name. And my mother always used to say to me that I should have been named Wilbur, and I was always happy that I wasn't. So for my grandson Wilbur, I am Papa, which is just fine with me. Okay, where do we want to my left?
Okay, my name is Valerie Bergshema. I think you want some information about what our background is.
Whatever you want to say about yourself.
Well, I was interested in participating in this in a volunteer.
You're going to need to speak up so she can hear you because we're using this
Oh,
mic.
Okay, that mic is, would you start with your laptop?
It's right here. It's on my laptop.
Okay, how are we doing? Is that better? Okay, my name is Valerie Gray Shemuth. I am a nurse by profession. I guess I'm also a professional horse person by profession, as I operate a horse farm for at-risk youth in our community. I've done a lot of different things in my nursing career that hopefully, including some administrative work, which hopefully will have some benefit with these discussions. I guess the other important part about what I bring to this group is my husband was a 20-year undercover police detective in a city police department. And of course that impacts on the entire family and some knowledge as well. I actually instructed police officers for years in certain medical pieces of information and so on. I can't think of anything particularly interesting.
That's okay. That's good.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to speak up. My name is Dan Monks. I'm the assistant town manager for the town of Bennington. I've worked for the town now for about 22 years. And Bruce always makes us come up with a fun fact, so this is the fourth time I think he's made me do that, so I'm reaching. But fun fact, or interesting fact, maybe not interesting, but something you probably don't know, is when I was 16 years old, my first car was a Triumph Spitfire Roadster, and I rebuilt it basically from the ground up, so it's one of my proudest accomplishments at that age. So
That's good to know. You want to introduce your person to your left?
this is Linda Bermudez. She's our what do we want to scribe today.
That's correct.
And Linda, why don't you tell us, you've worked for the town for a long time.
21 years. I've worked with town for 21 years, and fun fact, I'm a transplant from Brooklyn. So,
Wow.
And it's a nickname, so.
yes, and that
Yes. We'll just keep going around to Al.
Okay, I'm Al Pashevkin. Is that loud enough?
Well, can you hear Kaya? Okay, so far so good.
Okay, I'm Al Pashevkin, retired social worker. Worked for almost 30 years in North Adams, running Communities Coalition, the Health and Human Services Coalition, and actually a little over 30 years ago I worked at UCF, so I worked here in Bennington as well. Was familiar with the mental health system back then. I don't know how much that's changed since then, but had it back then. Fun fact is I grew up in North Adams, so which is not all that much different from Bennington, so I feel like I'm home.
Great. Dan.
Yep, Officer Ferrara, Bennington Police. Been with the police department for over 4 years now. Again, like Mr. Monks, trying to stretch now for my facts, but I'm going to go with you on the car stuff. My entire life, I've had a relationship, I would call it, with the Franklin automobiles that were manufactured in Syracuse, New York, from
Yes.
1902 to 36.
Yep.
And I own a 1926 Franklin touring car.
Very cool.
Thank you, as a former resident of Syracuse. Thank you. Asher.
Hello, everyone. If you cannot understand me, please let me know. My mask tends to muffle my words when I'm not mumbling. So, my name is Asher Edelson. I'm a proud resident of the Bennington area. I worked at DPI, where I worked as a residential counselor. So my work is involved with children who have a variety of different issues, including mental health disabilities. I am very passionate about making a difference. I really want to make sure that we get something good done today. I'm very excited to be working with each of you. You have a great variety of experience here, and I'm very proud to be on this committee with each of you. My fun fact would have to be that I have Tourette syndrome. It's a neurological disability for which I have given each of you Tourette Syndrome Association's brochure for training for law enforcement. I've given a little bit more to Officer Ferreira, that way he can distribute them as he sees fit. And if any of y'all would like any more of these, or I also have some for education purposes in particular, I'm happy to disperse them if any of y'all would like more. So, thank you.
Thank you. Kaya?
Hi, I'm Kaya Ganguly. I am the Assistant Director of Youth and Family Services and Community Counseling Service. I've been in the mental health field and nonprofit field in one way or another for most of my career, and I am older than dirt, so it's been a long time. Fun fact, I read at least one book a day because I'm a natural speed reader.
Wow. Don't I wish? Thank you. Thank you.
Would you like a delayed fun fact?
Sure.
Sorry.
If you've got a delayed fun fact, go get them.
Sorry, I haven't been to these meetings where.
That's okay.
I suppose I would say that fun fact about me is I was the first woman skydiver to do a jump out of an airplane without a static line in the state of Florida.
Wow. Okay, I think it's a fun fact. It scares me the willies, but
It was fun for me.
good. That's all that counts. Great. Thank you all. Let me just say again, just so you know, Dan and I are the sort of permanent members of this committee that meets every 2 weeks, at least for now. And what I'd like us to do is, and I'm not going to ask any more so you can volunteer. I'd like us to be able to identify, if you will, the issues that we see, noting that we're going to use, and this basically because there isn't right now not a better model, we're going to use the Vermont League of Cities and Towns as at least a basis for a policy. This is their model policy, not our policy, so we can be as, we can change as much of it as we wish for the most part. There is no statute here. Pardon? Yeah.
So, where was we one and not hurt anyone's feelings?
No, we're not going to hurt anybody's feelings. I've been in touch with the person who drafted this several times, and it won't hurt his feelings at all. In fact, he would like to know what changes we think we would like to make for the town of Bennington. So what I'd like this to do is I'm going to introduce, or just open the floor to concerns that you bring to this policy or to this topic. And I'll try to keep track of them and see how well we do at addressing them when we get to the point of drafting. So I'm really interested in that, the big issues as you see them. Yes, Al.
Well,
give me, and then I'll come to you, Kyle.
Oh,
Okay. No.
I guess I'm very naive about, I'm walking into this issue with not a lot of knowledge, and I'm actually looking to Officer Ferrara to help answer some of the questions, because I don't really know well what the scope of the problem. So, for example, how many officers are hired by the town?
In Bennington, we
Yeah.
have 25 full-time.
And per shift, how many officers are?
That varies. We have 3 shifts, and we have a minimum of 3 on a shift, and sometimes we can be up to about 6 on a shift.
So, the chain of command for each shift, how does that work?
Chain of command goes from officers to corporal to sergeant to lieutenant to chief.
they're available for all calls? I mean, is that a 24/7 job? Is that something that they're always engaged in?
What do you mean?
Well, say, right now, what's the chain of command? If something happened, how
Well,
would
it depends on the actual incident that is taking place. There are certain events that happen that require the lieutenant and or chief to be contacted. But other than those, mostly it's all handled either at the patrol level by an officer or a corporal or sergeant may have to be involved. It's all case by case.
Okay. How many mental health calls do you get? How big is this issue?
That is hard to say, because it varies, and we don't really,
Well, they don't track them,
yeah, it's,
per se.
I mean, we probably could pull numbers, but as far as right now, I couldn't come up with an accurate guess. It's something that's, I would say it would be safe to say we handle at least one call a day referencing some sort of mental health problem.
Sure.
Whether it be a suicidal person or, that's most of it is suicidal or self-harming. And once in a while we have, mental disability, or, not a panic attack, what am I thinking of?
PTSD?
Anxiety attack, stuff like people
Yeah.
we'll just get to their snapping points, and so there's a variety of calls that we will go to in reference to mental health. Most popular one being the suicidal or self-harming.
Yep. Let me at least characterize, and I asked whether I could do this after my meeting with the chief and the lieutenant. And it does go chief, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, then officer. They said that they felt that this issue was a significant issue for the police department and for the town. So that while they don't keep track of the actual numbers, and part of that, you know, with 25, with the size of the force that we have, the amount of data keeping that they're able to do is minimal, and obviously, or it is not as much as they may like to, or people would think that they would do. There's a lot of data as it is. I mean, that's the thing. So they would consider this to be a significant issue for them.
Can I-
Yes, and
Did you include the detectives in the 25?
No, well, in that number, yes, but they, as far as the chain of command, they're kind of their own leg.
Right.
right.
Okay, thank you.
So, most of those calls come directly to the police department, or they come to 911?
Either or. I mean, 911 eventually contacts our dispatchers.
Right.
Our dispatchers are the ones that dispatch us to all of the calls. It's just whether it gets brought in through 911 or someone calls the police department directly that's not something that
Right. And does everybody understand how 911 works in Vermont?
Yes.
Yes.
I can use,
And I think one thing I'd like to say, because we're on the other side of it, yes.
Yeah.
we're the victim. And we would like to see, some changes, because we want to be supportive of the community, and I agree wholeheartedly with our police representative that this is a major issue. It's one that gets tangled up with a lot of other things that we don't always understand or see it. But I know it's a major issue for them, and it's a major issue for us.
Okay.
Across.
Good. Thank you. 911 is a state system in Vermont, as is, so they have no control over the training that 911 operators get. But the 911 operators, let's say if they receive a call from someone here in Bennington, they will then transfer that essentially to the dispatch. And so the dispatchers work locally, and they're members of the local department. And they do have some, as I recall, significant, at least two of them have very significant training in the two full-time dispatchers in mental health issues, so that they're able to ferret out to some degree what they're dispatching an officer for. That's the way I understand it at the moment. Other issues that people want, or you have some more
I
questions?
just have
that-
one more question. Bennington's a small town. A lot of people know a lot of people. I mean, we know each other. Of the people that call engaged in mental health crises, how many of these people are familiar to the police department? Is that usually the case? Is that sometimes the case? Is it never the case?
You mean like people that we've come in contact with in the past and we kind of just know them, or?
Yeah, is
I
it,
mean, like you said, it's a small town. Myself, I would know a lot of people, if not by name, then definitely by face, just from driving around and noticing them and knowing that they are there.
so from your own experience, if you're called in on the most recent situation that you were called in on, and it was dealing with a mental health crisis, was it someone you knew?
One of the last ones I've dealt with, like I said, we go to these 1 to 2 times a day, so it's hard to remember, but most of the time it's someone that I have
So it
That's
is someone
fine.
that you're familiar with?
most of
Okay,
the time.
that's a good thing.
Okay, thanks, Al.
I might be
Yes.
ahead of the questioning here, but within the police department, do you have any type of, I know that if it's still accurate, there's, the beginning of shift, there's some sort of transfer of information amongst the shifts,
Yep.
is that correct? And then how about the calls that we're talking about? Are they recorded, logged, or discussed in some way?
Yep, so what you just mentioned, our discussion at the changing of shifts. What our normal practice is at the start of a shift. So we have 3 shifts. At the start of a shift, we go over all of the calls from the last 2 shifts since our shift signed off. So my shift, I work the evening shift until midnight. When I go in the next day at 3:30, we will discuss and go over all of the calls of service from midnight up to, through midnight shift, through day shift, and up to the start of our shift.
And to take that one step further, if you have, let's say, John Smith, who's a regular customer, so to speak. John Smith has a mental disorder, I'm just using a for instance. And John Smith, maybe you get called twice a week, twice a month, whatever. But that's been going on for years, or months, we'll say. Does the department have sort of a book or notation or something about John Smith so that everybody, if officer number 24 or something
Yep.
got
So-
the first call to John Smith, would he have something to look at to learn about what John Smith's modus operandi was prior?
There is that capability, yes. In prior meetings, we've discussed what we call our CAD system, which is our reporting system. Every incident that happens gets entered into that. Every officer that responds then types up a narrative of what transpired. As part of that, in each incident, anybody who was involved, witnesses, people that were there, victims, offenders, everything, every name that was involved gets attached to that in the system. And once that name is in the system, they have their own
File?
profile or something, or you could call it that, in that system. From there, we actually have the capability to enter notations or comments about a certain person. So whether that be a mental health type, like you said, routine customer, or however you put it, we can make notations in there. We put notations of if someone's a known IV drug user, if they're a known like hepatitis C. So there is that capability to do that. Usually though, for the most part, like we touched on, it's someone that if we know them, most likely the entire department knows them. The only time we run into that is with new people and they haven't experienced that person yet. But even then, they'll know about them and learn about them fairly quickly. If it does come into question, if it is someone that we don't know, we can ask our dispatcher, after we are called, we can ask our dispatcher if there is any information on this person. A lot of times too, with a mental health person, we have notations of a good contact for that person. Like if it's a younger person, or even up into their 30s or 40s, they might still live at home or still have close connections to their parents. So we'll put in that comment, if you come into contact with this person or have any issues, you can call mom at this number type thing. So there is that relay of information.
Can I just take it one more step?
You short, and then I'm going to go to Kayla.
I'm sorry.
Kayla.
So for instance, I live in Shasberry, and the state police respond to calls in Shasberry.
Yep.
Is there a connection between
Yep, so
departments?
just about the entire state, with the exception of 2 or 3 departments, uses that same
Oh,
reporting system, and we are all interconnected.
got it.
So I can look up someone from Newport, Vermont, and show their name and see all of their involvements that they've ever had with police, and any notations or any information on them.
Does that go across state lines as well to New York?
No, that would be something we would have to call over there, but usually if it's a big problem with someone, like if there's an issue with someone in Hoosick Falls, which we have had in the past, they hop the border often and cause issues on both sides. The agencies are usually pretty good at communicating between the two sides to keep everyone in the loop, mostly for safety, if someone's a safety issue.
Okay. Kayla.
So I have a question about the records keeping, like you have notes in people's files about mental health diagnoses or hepatitis status. How does that interact with HIPAA?
Say that again. How does it?
How does it interact with HIPAA? And if you don't want to answer that question, I think
I mean, it's not shared publicly. It's all just known information. We're not pulling medical records, everything like that. It would be something, if we know that, it was told to us by that person.
Well, not even thinking publicly shared so much as I
Right.
be able to talk to police, I have to have a release.
Right. And the answer, let me, I think that's a great question, and it's one that you might have seen an answer to under the IACP model policy, which I'm not suggesting we follow necessarily, but because they're dealing with folks around the country, it does come up, and there is an exception in the HIPAA statute that allows for a covered entity to disclose protected health information to law enforcement when it is, and this is the CFR language, it is necessary to prevent or lessen a serious or imminent threat to the health or safety of a person or the public. It's rather broad language. And that, so for example, if in the eyes of the Bennington PD officer in charge in responding to a scene, and the family says, well, you know, this person, she's a patient at UCS, they can call UCS, and UCS does not need to get a release signed by the person who is right now, you know, having a mental health crisis. They can actually release that information and be perfectly protected under that rule of the CFR. So HIPAA basically the code of federal regulations anticipates that kind of situation and the kind of, but I knew that it was going to come up, and thank you for bringing it up because I think it's exceptionally important when we're talking about record keeping.
Does that also hold true for FERPA?
I haven't looked at the actual CFR for FERPA, but my guess is it probably does. That would be my best guess, but I would never want to say that until I actually looked at it. And, you
I would
know,
say too, the one that we discovered, or I discovered when I started looking at the two, FERPA actually overrides HIPAA, because that much
Yep.
stronger the way. the
Yep.
law was.
right, I know, that was my area of law that I worked in, I get it. Okay, so we will have to think about that in terms of record keeping, particularly, or record obtaining, which is more to the point. I'm wondering if there are, well, let me give you some ideas of where my concerns are. And this may seem nitpicky, but I actually think it gets to some bigger, broader issues about how we address this.
Yeah.
For
I
the dealing with persons of diminished capacity language, as even the title of this policy is not one that I am enamored with at all. I actually do like the terminology that the IACP used. This is one of the places where I actually think their policy makes a little bit more sense, partly because persons who are experiencing a mental health crisis may or may not be persons of diminished capacity, and that whole issue of diminished capacity, I think, pushes us in a direction we don't want to go. That would be my personal feeling. I would really like it to, instead of saying, for example, and we're not editing yet, so when the time comes for us to be thinking about editing, I want us to be actually, and the IACP was pretty clear that this is the direction they wanted us to go, but I don't care about that. I care about doing it the right way. I would like us to talk about this as responding to persons who are experiencing a mental health crisis. Not getting into the mental, diagnosis at all. What do you think, Kaya? You were gonna say something.
I completely agree, because just because you have a mental health issue does not mean you're in diminished capacity. Those are really weighted words, and it's really old language.
That's what I would say as well. Now, it may very well be because that's the way the language of Vermont statutes. And I did spend a good part of an afternoon reading through Title 18, Section 7500, and I don't encourage anybody else to do that unless they really feel like they need to. But some of the language in Vermont statutes is pretty antiquated, and I won't characterize it any other way. But I would agree with you. My other place that when we get to it, and this is again a structural question, but it's actually a functional question about how do policies function. The policy statement in this particular model is one big long paragraph, and it is not organized in a way that I think is going to be helpful to a member of the Bennington PD. So at some point, when we're working on this, it does say a number of important things, and I think we can collect them and put them in separate paragraphs. A policy statement does not need to be one paragraph. There's nothing in policy making that says that you have to do it that way. The key is, what we're trying to do is to create something that is helpful to an officer, both in becoming acquainted with their job in Bennington, because it is the long-term goal that every single officer reads all the policies. Now, not everything in their big long book is a policy, some of them are protocols. But that they will have to sign off that they have read it and that they understand it. And that's the intent. So it is go ahead.
I agree with you. I think someone reading this
Yeah,
I think that's what was used for it. And I think it leaves officers open to a lot of liability, especially with the state where officers are expected to control the incident.
yeah.
I have a huge issue.
I had that one, I had that one marked as well.
But one of the things I did want to do, because people were emailing back and forth and had questions about crisis response. And
Right.
I did talk a little bit about that to help inform, so when we're talking about this, you understand what exists right now.
And I think now is the time to bring that up. I know I see Al shaking his head. So, Kay,
Bruce, can you turn the volume up a little bit?
I've got the volume up here as high as I can, so,
Also,
Kay,
How is this better from here?
yes, it is much better from where you're sitting.
Okay, I'm just leaning forward and like breathing on my computer.
I understand.
No, yeah, I know you. All right, so UCS has two crisis services. The first service is called FAST, which stands for Family Emergency. That service operates Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Anyone who has a youth in crisis, that can be, up to 18, can call that number and we will respond. Even today with COVID, we are still going out into the community and responding when necessary. If we can de-escalate over the phone, we will. If we feel that the youth needs some additional intervention, we have a psychiatric urgent care for kids. It's a level between walking in and getting regular service and going to the emergency department. We're trying to keep kids out of there because we know it's traumatic and it's not necessarily the best system. So the urgent care, kids can come in, we can do assessments, we can get a psychiatric med consult, we can do a lot of different things to try to help children and families maintain and de-escalate crisis. The second service we have is our 24-hour crisis service. It operates around the clock, it is always manned, people can go out, and they are going out in the community even with COVID. One of the nice things for us is we work hand in hand. When family emergency services ends at 8 p.m., our calls go to crisis services. And we have had the police call us. They do that, and we call them if we feel it's necessary. I'd love to see that more formalized and something we can talk about later, just some of the ideas that people have been speaking about that we also been speaking about. But know that there is a 24-hour crisis response event that can be had at just a phone call.
So those crisis calls, do you go to people's homes or do they meet you at a certain location?
So do you go to people's homes or do they meet you at a certain location?
We go to people's homes.
Okay.
We also meet people at locations. It really depends because someone might be having a crisis on the corner of Main Street, so we will go to Main Street.
Right. Gotcha.
So, we try to meet people where they're at.
Right. As of this moment, let me see if this is correct. Yeah, okay, Asher, sorry. Go.
I just wanted to voice some concerns. I don't know if you wanted to say what you wanted to say first or.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so my big concern for today, my concern is that we formulate a policy that appropriately addresses the safety of our law enforcement officers, people in crisis, and is also mindful of the anxiety that, a person in crisis, a failed interaction with a person in crisis could lead to anxiety for both the person in the crisis, people around, the officer, as well as lead to some financial troubles down the road, whether that's for medical care or a settlement or what have you. I'm just going to bring up a couple of cases really quick before I dive into the rest here. One of these was with a person of color who was stopped and I want to say arrested It was a drug charge, if I recall correctly, but it turned out that he did not have the substances that he was supposed to have. Apparently, he wasn't even the right person. And that led to a settlement that the state either had to pay. Not only that, but I also am thinking of a case that happened a number of years ago wherein a person in crisis showed up at the Bennington Police Department headquarters.
Oh,
He had a knife and was waving it around, and he ended up being shot. And I can't help but wonder if there was someone on call who could have been, and please correct me if I'm wrong, or if you want to add facts, and please do, officer. I wonder if there was a person on call who could have showed up on the scene, because this person was making threats, he had a knife, so he was dangerous. But as long as he wasn't lunging at the officers, as long as he wasn't, going from threatening to attacking, was it possible that a mental health specialist could have been called on the scene to prevent this man or this person from being shot? That could have saved the people involved some anxiety, a lot of anxiety. It could have saved a lot of money in terms of how much it's going to cost to rehabilitate this individual. And let's not even get into what this crisis caused the person, down the road. How much trouble are they going to be down the road after having been shot by the police? Now, of course, if he was not threatening, but if he was attacking officers with the weapon, at that point, use of force, I expect would be necessary.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So, one of my big concerns for today, one of my hopes, is that we have written out in our recommendation, it's explicitly to ensure that there is a person on call 24/7, a mental health specialist. Now, whether this person is contracted through UCS, I'm glad that we have two people here, someone who used to work and someone who I think now works for UCS, Kaya. I think that's wonderful because the language of this policy needs to explicitly state the need for that person to be on call 24/7 to assist officers or emergency services with the person in crisis. I think this will save lives, it will save anxiety on part of the officer and the people involved, or rather the people in crisis who are involved, not to mention the financial cost. That being said, I don't know whether this policy should indicate how this 24/7 mental health crisis respondent should be employed. I don't know, because the issue with hiring this person through the department could be tricky, because I understand that police budgets around the state are not as big as we might like them to be. So, I wouldn't want to, enforce a policy that ends up harming the department and, strips you all of resources that you might need for training or for, what have you. So I think that making sure that the policy indicates that we should be open to collaborating with UCS. I think that might be something to explore and something to discuss with Kaya and with Al, who have background. I happened to speak with a gentleman who used to work with UCS back in, I think, the 90s, Kirk McVeigh.
Oh,
He and I had some wonderful conversations about how we can address these issues. What maybe his number one point was that we need someone 24/7. Now, I think it's great that there's already a service that the UCS provides, wherein there's someone on call. I think that if maybe the issue is streamlining more than reinventing the wheel. Maybe if we were to collaborate and streamline between the Bennington Police Department, Select Board, and the UCS to ensure that there's communication. I think that might be the way to go.
well, let me address at least a couple of those things that I can speak to and say that one of my hopes, obviously, out of this is that there is a closer relationship or more resources that are made available to the Bennington PD to address people who happen to be in mental health crises, and maybe formalizing what I believe is right now an informal relationship. I think that's the most accurate way to describe it. And if anybody knows a better way to describe it, please say so. But right now, that's an informal thing. I will be, I would say that whether, I think we can, let's put it this way, I think when we're into the job of drafting the policy, it would be okay to suggest that certain relationships will exist or shall exist, even if they don't exist right now. Remembering that in the process here, and I forgot to tell you exactly how this process works. Eventually, when we're comfortable that we've got something that we want to send, what we're going to do is then send this to the chief, to the town attorney, to the state's attorney for review. Just so that we have our, and this one I think everybody is particularly interested in reviewing. When that comes back, it comes back really to the select board. And then the community will have their say in it. So my suspicion is that there will be opportunity for, let's put it this way, there will be ample opportunity for members of the select board who do have some say over the budget. In fact, a substantial say over the voters have the final say. About what can and cannot take place. So I think we should try to do whatever we think is best practice from our experience, from our life experience, from our reading, and from our study. What do we think the best practice is? And let the chips fall where they may later in the process. Does that make some sense for everybody? The other thing I want to address is the specific incidents you were talking about. I think they're important, but I also think that right now we don't have the time or the wherewithal to address specific incidents that have happened in the past. I do think we need to be thinking forward. I think your notion about safety and the long-term safety, I think about this from my own experience in terms of the long-term safety of the public, the person who's in crisis, the officer's safety and the public safety. The long-term, a violent outcome, which is not what anybody would want, can oftentimes be debilitating for both the person who may be injured, but also to the officer who may have had to do that. That's been my experience working in this area. So I would agree that I think one of our, when I had it down here circled, one of our places of emphasis ought to be on making sure that everybody stays safe as best as that's possible, right? Because that's what we want. Al?
So,
Sorry, speaking of crisis, I'm getting a crisis call, so I'm going to mute myself for a minute.
Okay. Okay, sure.
And then when you're done, I want to continue.
Yeah.
she's getting a crisis call.
She's getting a crisis call right now, so you're
All right, so I'm on. So, I think it's community education is really important. I was really excited to hear that UCS has the capacity to respond to crisis calls 24/7. So, in a sense, that's another force that's mobilizing the community to help people in mental health crises. I think, as we evolve over time, it would be great if that force was stronger so that the police wouldn't have to get involved. And I understand there are situations where we have no choice. You have to be involved. I also understand there are situations where you're called upon, and because of your presence with a gun, with the police are here, that may be really scary for the individual and the family, and there's a possibility that that could escalate the situation. If there was, as there are in other communities, and I sent an article around about the hoops, and I'm sure there's other programs like that around the nation. If we had the capacity to deal with situations that we can deal with without law enforcement getting involved, that might be a better solution. And I don't think we're going to deal with that today, but I think that I would love this policy to leave the door open so that we could begin to look at something like that over time for the town of Bennington.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah, hang on, Asher. I know that you've got more, and I'm gonna give you that chance.
Okay, I just wanted to, I had sent an email to Dan, and I wanted to ask, could you enlighten our group as to the training that is currently received in the police academy by title, I think, courses, in other words, sorry, I have the same problem here, I'm on call, I'll get that in a minute. The actual training that the police currently receive in the police academy on this topic. And that's question one that I was interested in. And question two was, is there ongoing training for the police department, either required or suggested or mandatory by the state or whomever, for this particular issue, how to deal with mental health crises?
So all of our training statewide in the police go through the Vermont Training Council. It's held in, it's one hub. It's where the police academy it takes place. And then from there, once the graduation happens, there is continuous training in all types of, directions. I know myself, I've taken a handful of specialized mental health type or mental disability type trainings.
Who leads or who's the trainer for those?
It varies, it depends on the course itself, whether it's a quote-unquote in-house trainer, all the way to whoever, people can come in from the outside, different consultants, everything like that. So every single training it varies, but all of the training has to be approved through the Vermont Training Council. So, like I said, I know myself, I have training in crisis negotiation type things. I have training in Team 2 training, which is...
Can you explain that?
Yep. Yep, Team 2 kind of dives right into like autism or Asperger's or stuff that you would kind of see almost every day, but not maybe not know about it, and definitely types of mental health problems that you have to take a different approach at, rather than going to a call and just dealing like you would any other call. Sometimes you have to find other ways to resolve an issue. So after the academy, the trainings are kind of individualized. I might be mistaken, but I know we're pretty on top of mental health being a constant topic for training for everybody, whether it be just through an online type webinar type training or an actual in-person classroom setting training. I know it's definitely not ignored by any means.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Does UCS go to those trainings?
Do they?
Have they trained the local police department around mental health issues?
I know UCS, I believe, works with Team 2. I'm not sure. I can't answer. Like I said, we do a lot of these, and there's a lot of trainings for a whole variety of things. So to keep track of who leads the trainings on each of these, I can't say right now off the top of my head.
So can I expand on the question? For instance, I'm fairly sure that each officer still has to go to the range and qualify periodically, is that
Yep,
correct?
so there are mandatory fields that we do annually or biannually. And that's what I can't quite remember off the top of my head if mental health is a required one, like domestic violence or use of force or CPR or there are a lot of ones that we do annually and biannually. So I can't remember off the top of my head if mental health type training is included in that. That's something that could get looked up and brought back to if it's still a question after today. But like I said, it definitely isn't ignored. We go through a lot of that type of training.
Well, is it fair to say, and I don't want to make an assumption or a generalization that might not be true of Bennington, but seems that, again, I'm speaking from my own personal background of my husband being a police officer, times have really changed.
Yep.
The days of the way government policing used to be done is different now.
I
So
agree with
based
that.
on that, would you, as a Bennington police officer, think that a small town like Bennington would benefit from a minimal, once a year, twice a year, 2-hour course or something that identifies assisting the police officer in dealing with a mental health crisis and more?
I would never say any training would not help, if that makes sense. I myself, and I know all it does is help. Whatever type of training it is, all it does is help. There's no such thing as a bad training, unless it's obviously directed towards something bad, but that's not a training. So I would say, obviously, the short word answer is yes, that would be great. But it would come down to budgeting, time, and getting the approval
Which,
from the training council.
yeah, exactly,
that
segues
also-
into
The logistics.
that other topic of how it would be handled, of everything from volunteers to an affiliation with UCS to, I mean, there's a lot of very interesting retired people here that teach all the time that
Yep.
I'm familiar with,
Mhm.
and very qualified people as well. Do you ever have other police officers from other departments giving programs?
Could be what?
Does the Bennington ever
Do
have police
training.
officers from other departments, larger departments with different problems come in and give training?
I mean, that's normally where our consultants come from.
Okay.
Usually, because obviously, police mostly retire after 20, 25 years of service. They're still, it's a retirement where they're still at the age where they go into a different field and have a whole other career. So it's kind of common practice for a retired police officer to get into that type of field of consulting of some sort and conduct trainings nationwide, sometimes even worldwide, depending on what their field of expertise is.
Right.
So I know one of our last trainings had to do with kind of community policing, and that was done by a retired law enforcement officer. Again, and it's something that he just goes around the whole country and kind of, he did a great job, he would do his research in the communities that he's about to do his teachings in, and kind of form and relate what his program would be in the community that he was going to. So it is not uncommon for police or retired police to host trainings.
And I just have one other question in general for Bennington PD. If a police officer is involved in a tragic situation, whether it be as a result of mental health, for instance, on the scene where someone
Sure.
has been killed, is there a program set up in your department for, we used to call it critical incident stress debriefing? Is
Yep,
there-
we have counseling available to us if we need it. There's certain incidents where if there's an officer involved shooting, that's mandatory. You're not working for a while, you're seeing counseling, making sure that you're okay to be able to return to work. So that is definitely focused on is our own, we definitely take care of our own health and our own mental health and everything. We take that seriously.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we know, yeah, I'll continue. So we know, one of the things I'm going to ask it eventually, and I'll take it upon myself to ask the chief, is we'll get a list of the annual and biannual training that is mandated, and I think that's a relatively simple request. It's listed, I just don't know where.
Yeah, I think you might even be able to find it right on the training council's website.
It might be on the training council's website. You're absolutely right. That's the one place I didn't look.
Yep.
Okay. So before I ask the chief, let me check their website.
They have the level 2 and level 3
Yeah.
part-time and full-time officers.
Yep,
And the required trainings.
exactly. So, wanting to just make sure we're all aware of the time. So we've spent about an hour here. I'm gonna let us go for about another 5 or 10 minutes, and then I would like us to actually begin the process of looking at this. So Ashley, you had a couple more things that you wanted to go, and hopefully Kay will be back with us.
Right, so I would be first of all very curious to know if the mental health and also the Team 2 training that you mentioned is mandatory for all officers. I'd also be curious to know if that training goes to the dispatchers as well for Bennington Police Department.
Yep, so I know that the Team 2 training that I went to it with one of our dispatchers, and I know there's a couple of our dispatchers that have. I don't believe it's...
Both full-time
Yep,
dispatchers have Team 2 training.
yep. I don't believe it to be a required training for all officers, but it is something that some do have. And then as far as other mental health type trainings, it is touched on in the academy, which every single officer that goes through the academy goes through. I mean, I couldn't even begin to list all the different trainings that you go through during that basic training. And then, like I said, after you graduate, doors are open for tons of other trainings that you want.
Absolutely, so I would certainly like to know if these mental health and Team 2 trainings are in fact mandatory for all officers and dispatchers of the Bennington Police Department to take, because if not, I believe that our policy should explicitly dictate the need for our officers and dispatchers to undergo that training. That being said, in the spirit of advocating for a comprehensive training, this brochure here actually mentions in-service training that the Tourette Syndrome Association provides for law enforcement officers. So I wonder if this policy could state explicitly that we would like our officers and dispatchers with Bennington Police to undergo this specific training, or at least a training that is similarly comprehensive. Because it's great if each officer, undergoes some degree of training with regard to mental health or other disabilities. And I'm not sure how comprehensive, touching on it, as you said. I don't know how comprehensive that is. I wonder if it's more comprehensive, how much more of a difference that could make with, officer interactions with people in crisis. So, I think it's great that this brochure mentions a specific training, and I wonder if the policy could reflect that as well, that we need to have mandatory training that is comprehensive regarding mental health and disability.
And go ahead. Kay, you're back. Thank you.
So, for example, there are some trainings that are available. We'd love to see the banks of police more available to them. For example, last week, there was a Team 2 training for the entire Southwest region, which includes Bennington, and there wasn't a single police officer represented.
And that may be because they were just at another training, and therefore it sort of blocked out their training time, since they were just at, actually, a couple of them, I know a number of people were at 2. But you're right, I think there are trainings, and we could be talking, what I catch from our discussion at the very least is that one of the things that we can make sure that is inserted into a policy is that there is ongoing regulated trainings that are made available, and we can discuss mandating. There's nothing wrong with us being able to say that. I just remembering that on a 25-member force, when somebody is being trained, or let's say two people are being trained, it's now a 23-member force. And I want training, and I want it, but I also want, I mean, we have force issues that we have to deal with as well. So that's a delicate balance that's not in our purview, but we can at least, I think we can include training as part of a policy statement. And that will be, there's nothing that says we can't do that.
Yeah, and
Now,
I would like
hang on, Al.
to add on to that, as much as the training that could be provided by local practitioners, I'd love to see that happen, because in process, that's going to build a community of caregivers, of the practitioners and the police force, and working on the same team. So if we could kind of insert that, I think that would be, I would like to see that.
I hear you. So utilizing local resources for training might be one of the places. And again, we're going to be talking about some of what we're going to be talking about, it seems to me, will be in the area of procedure, which we can recommend. And some of it will be in policy, which we can identify and state. So I think all that will be good. Yes, one more, and then I'm going to ask us to move to concrete work.
Going to the topic, if we just use the word, and a possible voluntary force, because we're a small community, and every agency I know here in town uses volunteers in some way, shape, or form. I'm a nurse, I volunteer at the free clinic, and so on and so
Right.
on. So I think you'll find that there's a lot of qualified people that if they were, just as you mentioned, I can't imagine at least every retired police officer who has some knowledge and expertise would share,
Sure.
once a year, 2 hours of their time, not necessarily for money or funds.
Yeah.
So I think we can focus on that because there isn't a lot of funds for this, I'm sure.
No, funds are one thing, but there's also time is also one of those
Time's
issues
the same thing, yeah.
in a small force where we're talking, somewhere in the neighborhood of, at the most on the day shift, 6 to 8 officers, including supervisors, right? Okay. So, that being said, 10, for the next 20 minutes or so, I'd like us to take a look at, and I'm going to move us there. I'd like us to actually take a look at the actual policy and see if we can start really at the very beginning. You will notice that we've already made one quick change, and that is that the related policies are response to resistance / use of force. That's one policy. It's still in the draft stage, but it's hopefully headed to the select board. I'll know more later today. The transportation should also be up there. That should actually not be crossed off. That's a separate policy. It may not be one that we currently have. So it'd be, there you go. Because transporting, among the things that the statute does anticipate is transporting persons who, I think actually it's 18 VSA 7511 is the statute that deals with transportation of people who are in mental health crises. Excuse me. Can't get rid of it. So, on the title, Katie, you were also mentioning that you did not like that.
No, I would much rather, I much prefer the IACP model policy and some of the language in there. I'd rather
How about responding to persons experiencing a mental health crisis?
That's the exact title.
Because that way, we're not, one, not all people who are in mental health crisis have diminished capacity.
Yep.
That's a pretty loaded thing, especially when we're looking at involuntary commitments which can happen and things like that.
Right.
So I think it opens up way too many worms, and it's also so negative, I
Yeah,
think, making them others.
yeah,
And I like, one of the things I like about the person's experiencing a mental health crisis, it's separating person from crisis.
exactly.
Like what you say, someone who's depressed versus a person who's suffering from depression. There's a very big difference between the two.
Right. So let's put it up there and see how it flies. So the first thing we'll do is we will replace that with responding to persons
Experiencing a mental health crisis.
it's experiencing a mental health crisis, right? And yes, that's exactly the language of the IACP. Yes, I'll admit, I was torn between this policy, model policy, and the IACP model policy. But the reason I'm suggesting we use this as the basis, although we're going to change a lot of it, is that the IACP policy doesn't take into account Vermont. It's a national and therefore sometimes open and vague policy, and we can be a little bit more specific. So there you go. So how do people feel about that? Does that sound better to everybody?
Much better.
Yeah, I like it, and quite frankly, my guess is, Dan, you have no clue whether somebody has a diminished capacity when the time, whatever that might mean, and I'm not even sure I know what that term means.
Yeah, it's a pretty broad term.
Yeah. So, okay, let's just hold that like that for now. By the way, before we leave today, we'll go back through and look at the policy and how we've worked on it, and we'll think about, does the front end look like the back end, et cetera, because sometimes you can get off into a place that you don't think you're going to go. So let's start with the purpose section, which is just down below this. And if you would like to move our pictures somewhere where it's not into the, just shove it around, yeah, there we go. And actually, Kay is much more important than I am. There we go. Perfect. I like it. Okay.
Can I just say for starters, why is it field officers instead of all officers?
Yeah, I'm not sure, this is the first time I came across the term in a model policy, field officers, and is that even a language that the BPD uses?
So that would just be the terminology to differentiate between the officers that are working the road and taking calls and responding to things, as opposed to more of the in-house type, like detectives that work out of their offices.
Right.
So that would be how I would interpret that, would be just
Well,
differentiating that.
But let me play devil's advocate. Are we suggesting that, let's say I get Gold Shield, I'm never going to deal with people in a mental health crisis ever again? And therefore, I don't need the guidance of the policy.
Yeah, I mean, detectives and stuff like that, they're not responding, they're not taking calls, responding.
They're not first responders. You're absolutely right.
That's why.
But I guess I would like to,
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying that's how
I would like
I,
a law enforcement officer, because you never know. What if the
Yeah.
chief is, when something happens, is he not bound by the policy?
yes, he is. And I will say, so the purpose is to provide law enforcement officers, and that's the way I would put it, because that's consistent with the rest at the moment. And again, though we're right now changing this, go ahead, law enforcement officers. It's just on a computer, we can actually change it back, it's really easy. And then a capital O. Sorry. If we're gonna capitalize the other, we have to capitalize. Right, because that's a term. And one of the things I did like about this particular one, we'll get to the persons of diminished. Wherever it says diminished capacities in this, we're going to eliminate that. We're going to actually cross that out, but not yet. One of the things I liked about this is it's talking about essential tactical and processing skills necessary to effectively deal with a situation. That, it seems to me, is really critical. That's the purpose of the policy. That's one of the things that I liked about this policy. So I would assume, and without talking too much, that we would like to change persons of diminished capacity to persons experiencing a mental health crisis, and then we can probably go to,
Also change effectively deal to effectively respond to.
yeah, I like that, that's better. Mental health crisis, hang on. Yeah, oh, and I apologize, I write this. She's only gonna respond to my direction, because it makes it life miserable for her. If she's thinking she has to respond to whatever any of us say, the rest of us. So, I know you were directing it to me, and I appreciate that. And I think, yes, instead of deal with, which I used to cross that one on all my students' papers, respond to.
I don't know, I think it's more than respond, it's interact with, it's.
Okay, so.
I think when you say respond, it's fairly limiting, but maybe it's because this is saying responding to experience, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, so
Well, I don't know, maybe that's a good enough word, but
let me ask Dan the question, because I think that's an interesting one. When you're called upon to when you think of the term respond to, that's I'm looking at the connotation of it more than the denotation. What are you thinking? I'm called to respond to this incident.
Like you were saying, it's kind of limiting it, because responding would just be getting there, and then maybe the first sentence being said, that would be you responding to the incident.
So
What I would probably, a term that I would probably use is handling, something like that. Could we handle calls? Something of that nature. I understand that verb can also kind of
yep.
de-emphasize what you're doing for that being fit more.
Interesting.
So you're talking about the word respond?
Instead of, we want them to be able to effectively,
How about intervene with?
ooh, that might be even better. Intervene with? Would that be a broader, more expansive, I mean, this is just a purpose statement, so. Instead of, let's delete respond. And just put it up there as intervene.
That being said, do we want to change up there, where it says, doesn't it say responding to up on the,
No, because I think the response, in that sense, the title of this,
right?
this is just the broad category. We're just, what happens when you get a call? And it's a person in a mental health crisis. This is the policy that follows. And the purpose of this policy is to provide, again, we know we've said law enforcement, with the tools, the tactical and processing skills necessary. That also helps deal with training, because we're going to try to provide them with those tools. With persons of experienced mental health crisis,
Can we reconsider interact instead of intervene, or is that too light?
I think it's too light, but I'm willing to listen to others.
Well, I don't know, I defer to Dan on that. Intervene sort of implies that you're going to do something, when in fact, interacting doesn't necessarily imply that. You just show up and maybe do nothing, but listen to somebody, as opposed to striking a dialogue. It's just a thought. I'm not married to it. It's
I hear you.
better.
It's not a hill you're gonna die on, is that what you're
Yeah.
saying? I got that.
Because really,
Go ahead, yep, go ahead and then you and then Al.
I was just going to repeat myself.
Okay, Al.
And is there some way to, it's not just the person that has a mental health crisis, the family has a mental health crisis. And I bet you're responding to the person in an environment, is that? I mean, should we
says person.
reflect upon that, or am I just kind of off the wall in terms of thinking about what those situations are like? Are you responding to an individual, or more often are you responding to a family who's trying to respond to an individual?
Yeah, it's hard to say. They can, even if it is just an individual, there's still a family that's 99% of the time, there's still a family that's also affected.
Right, and that's why it's plural. I wasn't thinking of the person, with a person's
Okay.
experiencing, because there's a whole community or group of people who are experiencing a mental health
So that's
crisis of
what-
some sort.
that-
That's what I think that says. In a manner that provides, and let's just finish that sentence for a moment. In a manner, and then, by the way, I'm not going to be wedded to any of this language, just let's get something up there that's grammatically correct. That provides the required professional assistance.
Oh, I would get rid of required.
Well, let's wait, and we'll do that in a minute, but I want to have a sentence that's actually a sentence and not something that's junk. That provides the required, because I might not agree with any of this, the required professional assistance these persons need, comma, to protect the community, comma, to save, and I would just say, and to safeguard the officers involved in the encounter, period. Yep, I would delete that. And there's a reason why I will, how do I want to put this? In general, policy is always dealing with risk management. Use of force policy is an engagement in risk management. That's the nature of it. Probably almost every time we're asking police to go out and respond to a call, there's an exercise in risk management. We have never said that it is the purpose of a policy to limit the town's liability. And obviously, good policing does limit the town's liability. That's a given. So I found this one to be offensive in this spot, because I don't, why at a moment when we're dealing with this particular response situation, do we all of a sudden bring up our own risk management situation? Every single incident is a risk management situation, in my opinion.
I agree.
So that's now we can go back to,
What I was saying.
we can go back to arguing about, I will let the professionals in the biz, and there are a number of you, talk about that providing, we had at least one person here who was suggesting, and I don't have a problem with it, that we eliminate the required profession, the word required.
I agree.
Yeah, how do we know what's required?
Yeah.
And I think that's also putting this purpose in
Mhm.
jeopardy, because maybe you can't provide the required professional assistance to
Precisely.
If
Yeah.
that's not the role. The role is to go and assess and determine what's next.
And it would also be asking the police officer to do some kind of diagnostic, and I'm not sure they're in a position to do that. So let's get rid of, that provides just get rid of the word required, and see how that reads.
I personally.
And I recommend getting rid of the word these, because it makes them seem like others, like they must be aliens or something.
Yep,
People are people.
yep, and it's a particularly unnecessary word. So we're getting ditched, let's ditch that one.
Not that it's an unprofessional function, but I think professional assistance takes this to a higher realm that's impossible when you're answering a first call. In other words, no matter, you can't assess any situation at the high level the professional calls for. That's my opinion.
Okay, so let me see if I understand, just so that I am clear, and I'm gonna ask those kind of clarity questions all the time.
That's fine.
So, if I hear the suggestion, it would be to eliminate the word professional.
And not because it's an unprofessional task. but
No,
that word
but what we're trying to do is state what the purpose of this policy is. We'll get to what,
To come help.
it's to provide the context, the people in the context, with whatever assistance they need, and to protect the larger community, and to safeguard the officers involved in the encounter. I think that makes sense. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, that makes sense, and grammatically, it
Yep.
should be commas, not and.
Yeah, we'll get rid of the ands. Yeah, we're getting rid of that and the word professional. Thank you. So it read in a manner that provides assistance to persons, let's get rid of the word to, just go back from there. Yeah.
Or,
What did you just say?
I'm to say, I'm sorry, I said the whole sentence. How does this sound? So experience a mental health crisis in a manner that provides assistance to persons in need, comma, to protect the individual and community, comma, as well as safeguarding the officers involved in the encounter.
I like that. Let's try that.
Yeah.
And don't lose what you just said. So, let's see,
The persons in need.
I know, let's see.
The
But
first
you,
person.
The individual and community.
to protect the individual
Well,
and community,
As well as
and then as well as, delete that, as well as,
safeguarding.
yeah, instead of using we're gonna use a gerund instead of an infinitive there. How's that?
the only thing,
Safeguarding.
Yeah,
yeah, I would put individual slash with an
That's what I
S.
would say.
So it might be more than one person.
yes, so yes, but slash it, put a
Right.
individual, and then put
Right.
parentheses around the S.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's read it out loud. Ooh, and we're gonna be perfect on this. To provide law enforcement officers with the essential tactical and processing skills necessary to effectively intervene with persons experiencing mental health crisis in a manner, experiencing a mental health crisis in a manner,
Well, it could be them experiencing mental health crises also.
yeah, it could be. Although let's just leave A in there for a minute. You're right. In a manner that provides assistance to persons in need to protect the individuals and community, as well as safeguarding the officers involved in the encounter, period. I like it. And let's come back to that one note. Here's where we are, folks. We've just been an hour and a half. We've actually done a lot. I have a list of things that we need to address. My suspicion is we'll come back in 10 minutes to just quickly look at this and then move on to what is going to be a much harder thing, which is dealing with this, or it may be easy. There might be a way in which we bring in the IACP model policy at this point. But let's take a 10-minute break. Here's where I'd like us to go. And that is, instead of just trying to perfect this lines 10 through 25, doesn't mean that we're not going to use this. I'm just going to make the suggestion. And that is, let's make up, because we've already suggested that these lines, actually it's more than, it's all of what you see on the screen and a little bit more, right? And you can now see why some of the language here is out of date, because it's 14 years out of date. So what I'm going to suggest is that we make a list of, or we quickly I can certainly write it down. You don't need to make it up here. Make a list of the basic concerns that we're interested in regarding the policy itself. What will be the policy? So in other words, think of it in terms of the Bennington Police Department shall A, B, C, D, something like that. So rather than this sort of flowing descriptive language that's not really a policy, and if you have in front of you the policy from the model policy from the IACP, I'm not sure that that's always that much more helpful, but some of its language may be more helpful. I have heard in our earlier discussion and in our discussion around the purpose, I have heard at least 3, maybe 4 things. One, and not in any particular order, so don't feel like I'm going to die on a hill for any of this. One is safety. That's safety for the person or persons experiencing the mental health crisis, safety for the community, safety for the officers is a primary value that we're trying to uphold. Training is one of our issues, that there be not only initial training, but also continuous or updated training on a regular basis. 3, that there be some, how do I want to put it? Some perhaps referral, when it's appropriate, a referral to or an engagement with other professional services in the community.
I would really like it to strongly be engagement with.
Yeah, well, we'll wordsmith this, but if you, okay, so engagement with that, and there was a 4th one that I hope will not lose my mind here on this one. A reporting out, basically, making sure that it's what they do, but
Post-incident.
post-incident evaluation, so that they learn from. The Bennington PD has a chance to learn from every experience that they have. And we know that you do, but it's always helpful to say it in policy, that there is some kind of post, particularly on any situation, some kind of post-incident. So those are the 4 things that I had Is there a fifth one that, hanging over here then?
Community education be an important component, and that could be there and be responsibility, and that could be part of our policy, and the police can help educate the community about where to call when they're experiencing a mental health crisis.
That's an yes, and let's put it in just for now, because I don't want us to lose that conversation.
Okay.
I think that's an important conversation for us to have. I'll just leave it at that. And Asher, you had one additional?
Regarding the third point of having, I think we need to explicitly state that we need someone 24/7 on call to be available that I guess, dispatchers through the Bennington Police Department will be able to identify, okay, we need to send our 24/7 person to this incident.
Okay.
I think having our policy explicitly state the need for that 24/7 person, regardless of whether or not they're hired through Organization A or if they're contracted through UCS, I think we need that to be an official thing. That way it's not potentially forgotten about or disregarded. I think it needs to be 24/7, and the person needs to be someone that can be contacted from the dispatcher. In other words, the dispatchers know, okay, this is a crisis, we need to send this person with our police or with our emergency people.
So what I hear is that that's going to be part of that, what is it, active engagement with community resources. To some degree, I'm going to suggest that part of what you're describing is how does that get done? And that's a procedure issue for the Bennington PD. So if we state that they will have access or they will work toward getting access to community resources or engagement with community resources, and how we say that will be really important, and I don't right now know how we'll end up saying it, but we're going to let the process or the procedure of doing that to the agency that we're actually directing under policy. So the policy will be the broader statement. How they decide to do that will be their piece. So I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying, sort of have to keep in mind the division between what is policy and what is procedure. So whenever we talk about this, we'll be thinking in terms of what's the policy. So we want to develop strong organizational work with, interagency, that may include, but may not be limited to, interagency agreements. Again, I don't want to tie the hands on how this gets done. I'm hearing at least several of you say that this needs to be, we need to say something in policy about that there is this.
Just because we have so much of this successfully happening around the state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, and there's just some stuff going, I know there's been a lot of different initiatives, and I actually sat down and interviewed Crisis to see what, and
Right.
they believe about when it works so well.
Okay.
And they'll never hesitate to call the police, because the police will respond, the police will call them, it's just not happening enough.
Okay. I hear you. Okay.
So I'd like to somehow encourage that. I know it's up to them to make procedure, but I want them to realize that it's so successful
Yep.
all over the state. I want that to be.
I'm with you. So let's, okay.
Could you summarize what she just said? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Sure. What Kay just suggested is that there will be a need in the policy to describe, or at least talk about, the need for this kind of interagency agreement or,
MOU.
I'm I'm loath to right now say that a policy ought to say that there will be an MOU with a particular agency. I don't think that's helpful, but I do think it's helpful to talk about following models, other models in the state where there is a close interrelationship between mental health professionals and the Bennington and the police department. So there's language which we can find that can do that. Let me suggest that when I reread this policy statement that's in the document that we're using, when I reread that again this morning, and it may have been my own frame of mind, again, this strikes me as aspirational and descriptive, but not policy language. Doesn't look like any of the other policies we've worked on. And so here's what my suggestion is. We right now leave this alone, and on the beginning of, I think it's the next page, right after right before definitions. If we can, just put things down. We may want to move them around. So right after the word persons, you're going to double space down a couple. Yep. You're not going to work. Yes. Thank you. And it'll be under policy. So don't worry about that. It'll be under policy, Roman numeral 2, and the letter starting the Bennington Police Department, and after that parentheses BPD. That just lets us know that from here on in, that's what it's going to look like. Shall. Colon. We may change that and then put a colon. We're going to make a list. That's a semicolon, I think. Thank you. We're going to make a list starting with A. Right. And so I think safety comes first. And how do we want to say that maybe in a way that's reminiscent of where we were? We've talked, I mean, the mission statement of the Bennington Police Department talks about safety.
In responding, I'm just going to toss out a sentence.
Yes.
In responding to mental health crisis, shall do whatever is, shall work to ensure the safety for the individual, the family members, the police officer, and the community around.
Okay, let's put that up and see where that flag flies. Okay, so when responding, actually, I'm gonna just delete where you just went, because actually I think we're gonna do it. I like the Bennington Police Department, comma, up above. You see where we are up above? After BPD. Put a comma. When responding to persons experiencing a mental health crisis. Shall, and then A. And L, that's where we want that language. Shall,
work to ensure the safety of
let's write it down and where we can just work to assure the safety of the person,
the individual in crisis,
the individual in crisis.
the family members,
Yep.
the police officers, the officers responding to the call, and the community at large.
Okay, so the individual in crisis, the family members, the officers, and others responding,
Yeah,
and others responding, just there, and then comma, and the community at large.
Can I do some grammar?
in a minute, let's get the comment out, and then, yes, trust me, grammar will be important to me. You may have noticed that already. Okay. And when we're making lists, we're gonna put a comma after officers. Oh, wait, except officers and others responding. Okay, we did that, fine. Okay, now you can
I
suggest
like just
grammar.
the first few words, how about strive to maintain? As opposed
Instead
to,
of work,
pardon me?
oh, rather than to ensure.
Yeah, I mean,
Shall,
I just,
shall work or shall strive to maintain the safety of, that I like that better. I like that, so we're just eliminating that, you can delete. Strive to maintain. What do we all think about that language, just so, while we're there?
I like it.
I like it. Now, would it be a comma between crisis and shall or no?
Crisis.
See how-
No, because that's gonna actually be the beginning of every single
Right.
sentence.
And at first they're gonna do this,
Right.
and then they're gonna do something else.
Right. Shall strive to maintain, so you can read it just like that. You're experiencing an addiction, so strive to maintain. Do we like that? Do we feel good about that? Nods?
You should probably say individual, S,
Yes.
individuals.
Yeah, because there might be multiple friends, yes. If, by the way, if we don't do that here, either Dan or I will catch it, we hope. We hope. And then before it goes out to the legal reviewers, it'll come back to you for 48 hours, just to make sure that you're still where you were today. And then it'll go out to the reviewers, so we're good so far. Okay, I like to keep these as neat and tidy as we can so that an officer reading it, or a member of the public reading it, gets it, okay? B, want to deal with training? Do we want to deal with training?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Shall, good, I hear Kaya saying yes too. So, shall, provide,
Participate.
work,
Ensure.
ensure, how about that language? Ensure
Comprehensive.
that, I like the word comprehensive, that its officers, ensure that its officers receive,
Well, wait a minute, you're responding here.
yes, I was thinking, hang on just a second, let's get the sentence out, and then we'll be able to come back and change things.
Okay.
Regular and comprehensive training in what?
Appropriate, current and
If you say
appropriate.
mental health, it leaves it wide enough that responding to, it gives them enough room to be able to, they're trying to think if you get too specific,
Right.
we limit what kind of trainings they take. We just want to make sure that they're getting regular constant.
Comprehensive training in mental health or in response to mental health? I mean, I think the
It's-
two things are, there's mental health issues, so you want to know roughly what am I dealing with? This is how I'm thinking, I'm looking at Dan at the moment. And you're also wanting up-to-date
Strategy.
strategies and skills in how to respond. Does that make sense to you? Okay, I'm getting a nod from Dan.
Well, I mean, your role isn't to assess and diagnose mental health
No.
conditions. I think we want to be careful in the language so we don't go in that direction.
Right.
Your role is to respond to mental health situations. So I just wonder about the first part of that sentence, whether that is leading us.
When you are, and help me out, I think we went back and looked at the Criminal Justice Training Council's level 2 training. And you are provided with what I think and then help me out, the language, but is it something like mental health? I think it's, isn't it? What is it? Or is it mental health responses to mental health issues?
So under police patrol techniques criteria, it goes to dealing with people with mental health, dealing with people with mental illness is the curriculum that's covered. As part
Mental
of
illness.
the,
So dealing with people with mental illness.
yeah.
So that's what you go there.
So training in response to persons in, why don't we just say response to, in training in response to persons in mental health crises, and then let the chief figure out what that, I mean, we know what that means, and it's broad enough, but it's not so specific that I don't want to direct the exact name of the training. I want them to be, because we're really interested in them responding. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I have a little problem with how it's,
You say you have to do A, B, and C.
Right.
Or curriculums. Here's an area that we want you to focus on. Buy into it by choosing.
Right. So let's finish the sentence, and then I'm going to come back to you.
I don't see any problem with what Dan said. What's the title of the training program?
Yeah, it's responding to people, I think it says with mental illness.
Dealing with people with mental
I don't
illness.
like that.
Yeah, see, I don't think dealing with people with mental illness helps,
I'm sure it's not true.
because then you have to diagnose whether somebody has a mental illness, and that you can't do. So I would say training in responding to persons in mental health, with experiencing mental health crisis.
Cases.
Yeah,
Bruce,
pardon?
going farther down into the definitions, they define mental illness, and it says this policy does not require officers to make a diagnosis of whether the subject is mentally ill or what form of mental illness the subject may have,
Right.
rather to use reasonable judgment to recognize behavior.
Right.
So I'm just saying that
Right,
later on in
and
the
I think when we
definition
get to the definitions, some of this will make more sense.
Yep, that's
Right.
why I'm just jumping ahead, letting you know
Yeah.
that it doesn't
No, I agree.
involve us diagnosing it or anything.
True that officers receive regular intensive training and responding to persons experiencing mental health crisis.
I think that's a good broad policy statement.
I know it's a broad.
I think it's good, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but okay.
Because otherwise, we can get in the weeds.
And I don't want us to get in the weeds, exactly. So can we try C?
But it doesn't match, you have, your topic is up top, experience mental health care, shall, and then you have action things here, and B is not actually an action thing.
It's not, this is not an action thing. These are policies. This is a policy statement.
All right, but then the page doesn't change the topic yet.
Right, you are, it shouldn't, because when responding to a person who's experiencing mental health crisis shall, it doesn't fit B. It also doesn't have to be there for A either, I don't think.
I guess I'm lost on the comments. So help me out, just that
So
I
the Bennington
understand
Police
where you're
Department, BPD, strike when responding to a person experiencing mental health.
Right.
Shall.
Okay.
Strive to maintain
Right,
safety of
right.
individuals experiencing, we should say.
Okay, so just,
Because this is.
what happens if we eliminate everything up to shall?
Right,
Right,
fine.
that would be fine.
And not including shall, up to shall.
There we go.
In other words, where we were before.
Yeah, because A, B is right now is action stuff.
Yeah.
So
I think that works better.
Okay,
I mean, you may want to clean up, maintain the safety of individuals experiencing a mental health crisis, just to make it clear, but in crisis, people know what it means probably anyway.
yeah,
Well, I like A that way because it doesn't necessarily mean that just when you answer a call, you do this, but that's their whole genre of their
yeah.
department.
No, I agree with you there, yeah. Let's go to C and D and then see if we can come back and if we really like this, we can then replace what's up above. This section had to do with, and this is where we're, shall engage with, is that the word we wanted to use
Sure.
at the moment? We
Don't
can
you want
actually
to say,
describe it.
Collaborate?
Or collaborate with Okay?
I would
I
say
think there's two L's in collaborate, yeah.
Yes, there.
appropriate mental health agencies.
Or with, can we say mental health agencies and professionals?
Actually, appropriate community agencies, because there's others that are.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, there's any number.
Yeah.
Appropriate
Community agencies.
community
Partners.
partners. Good.
I
Two,
have a question about this one.
yep,
So one of the things that, and I know everyone's busy and hectic, but one of the things that we were talking about when I was talking to Crisis at ECS is
mhm,
one of the things that a lot of other counties in the state do when they find really helpful is they have whatever they want to call it, like monthly commanders meetings for agencies and stuff like that. They always invite the director of crisis so that they can, so maybe it's collaborating with community partners and come up with some kind of meeting that happens on a monthly basis. So people are really tightly collaborating, like this person we're working with, we know there's stuff going on, that kind of thing, to really start making a safety net versus just a response.
ah,
Can I just chime in on this topic, Kayla? Could you, I know that we're talking about UCS, but I'm pretty sure DCS has a role when it's minors.
And that's why I'm saying, even if it's some type of monthly community meeting that is UCS, DCF, Sunrise, Payne,
Right.
and someone from the police that meets on a monthly
Right.
basis. Like sort of, we have a pediatric care team right now that we're part of, where we meet with healthcare providers and social services every month and go through different families and children who need extra support.
right,
So we can put
So
all
the-
resources
right.
around.
right. So in a policy statement, you would say that you want, collaborate and meet with appropriate community partners
On a regular
on a
basis.
regular basis without trying to say you're going to meet with X, Y, and Z. That's their job to try to figure that out. So collaborate and we're going to add some sentence. Collaborate after the word collaborate
Yep,
for the moment, and meet with, and meet, we've already got that, with appropriate community partners
To further.
in order, or to provide,
To further.
just get rid of either word, to provide,
I like further, because it implies to keep on going.
to further what?
Whatever we're gonna do. The working relationship between the agencies.
a cohesive,
Response plan,
response.
or at least to provide a cohesive, let's try language for a moment, response,
To further the community response for people experiencing mental health crises.
say that again, Al.
To further the community response for people with mental health crises.
Okay, so let's write after the word to.
Can I back up a minute? Isn't this C?
Let me get this sentence out first, and then we'll go there, because, yeah. Delete that for the moment, where you just, okay. To further the community response to persons,
For
or for persons in crisis.
persons and their families in crisis.
Persons and families in crisis. Okay, okay, so let's put a period there for the moment, and now you go ahead.
Well, I'm just
Yeah.
going back to the action plan. We talked about referrals and bringing in other professionals. So this is collaborate and meet with appropriate partners.
Right, we're not done with this yet. If you're thinking that there's, this sentence, I think, has to be longer. This one, C, needs to be longer than one sentence.
Okay.
we're talking right now, we're talking about collaborating and meeting with appropriate community partners to further the community response.
How about to, rather than to further, how about to better respond? I'm just trying to think, there has to be something with further because it's not making sense. To further improve,
To further, oh yeah, I don't think the further it works, but to improve the community response for persons,
right?
or just, let's say strengthen for now. Yeah,
Communication should be in there someplace, because that's the purpose
we
of
will,
safety.
yeah,
Somehow, that thought should be in there.
yep, in crisis. And now a new sentence. So among the places where we're talking about here is we're gonna need, what we're looking at, if I understand this, and without, I don't want us to get so in the weeds that we're requiring, MOUs and contracts, which policy should not do. Policy should invite actions that respond to fulfill the policy. But what we'd like to have is, without using this language, where both Asher and Al, I know, and others have talked about, a way for police to have access to mental health professionals and when I say police, I mean dispatchers as well as officers have access to these professionals.
24/7.
Yeah, in an as-needed basis. I mean, when they need them. So it might be at 3 in the morning, or it might be at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday.
We already do utilize UCS's 24-hour crisis
Right.
during
So that
situations.
exists, we just need to encourage them to use them.
All right, so the perception, what I'm hearing is, perception is, yes, we use them. Perception from UCS is not enough. And my question is there a way that the policy can be written so that conversation takes place? That's all I think we can encourage the conversation. We cannot mandate that there's a particular structure to that. I wouldn't
How
want
about
to-
people regular in there? That's-
Collaborate and meet. Yeah. Well, collaborate and meet regularly?
Or regularly collaborated meetings.
Or collaborate with appropriate community partners regularly in order to strengthen the community response for persons and family in crisis.
So partners and meet with appropriate partners regularly
Yep. Comma, in order to,
in order to.
That's extraneous to say in order to.
Yeah, I don't think you need to say, just all you need to say is to.
do, yep.
Yeah, so delete the in order.
Yeah, and it isn't.
I always say in order and then I delete it afterwards.
I do the same thing.
It's my mind goes there and then I say, nah, I don't do that.
And,
Strengthen the community response for persons and families in crisis at all times and on all day, on any day. At all times. I mean, I'm not sure that I like
You're
that
not
language.
collaborating and meeting at all
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, but your community but it's to strengthen the community response to persons and needs throughout. Well,
Well, how about just a new sentence,
Maybe the 24/7 should be another sentence.
yeah, maybe we do this in another sentence.
I just think that 24/7, that's not a policy, a police
It
policy.
is
That's
a
a
sentence.
select board.
It's not even,
Issue.
yeah, it may be a select board issue, it may be a process issue, a procedure issue. I think,
I mean, maybe we can say something like, shall, and this is not the
No,
word,
just-
but shall take advantage of appropriate resources available to police
Mhm.
officers and dispatchers to deal with Because then it's up to the select board to create that resource that the police have.
Right. I actually like thinking that in that terms, remembering that probably, you know, if money's involved, the select board's gonna be involved somewhere. I'm just making that as a generalized
So
statement.
how about it would be if you assist, put the next sentence, as assist, you're asking the police department, so assist in collaboration with the select board to develop a 24/7 schedule, something like that.
I'm reluctant to say to the, this is a policy for the PD.
Right. It's not for politicians.
It's not for us. I mean, trust me, I will guarantee that there will be a conversation,
So,
my guess.
so,
But I do like the idea of stating as a, sort of as a goal, that what we're trying to do is find, you know, appropriate responses on it for crises whenever and wherever they happen in the town.
so you want the word develop?
How about observing best practice? That might be a way to do it.
So I didn't catch all of that, Kaya.
I said, I was hearing what you were saying, and I don't know how to phrase it quite yet, but maybe what we need to do, put somewhere in this policy is we'll regularly update or understand best practices. Because then we're giving them solid, there's always, you know, if you look at a national, there are best practices based on research and things like that.
Right.
Maybe that's
Can-
what we do.
Right, I'm thinking about that. What about,
How about any?
just stating that the goal, let me try something out, Kay, and you can tell me, and everybody here. The goal of this collaboration is to provide appropriate responses no matter where, no matter when they occur, and no matter where they occur in town, in the town of Bennington. So we could say something like that. Let's try it out. Let's put it up there and see what happens. The goal of the collaboration, yep. You almost became British there for me.
I know, I can say the same thing. We're not going to jail.
Yes. The goal of the collaboration is to,
We don't need is.
well, we gotta have a verb. Is
Effectively respond.
to, yeah, and let's try it. More effective is to, more effective, we'll worry about the split infinitive in a minute. More effectively respond to mental health crises.
Regardless of location or time.
There you go. I like that much better than what I said.
Utilizing community resources.
Yeah. To effectively respond to mental health crises, no matter when or where they occur. Right? Is that what you?
Location or time.
Or no matter when they, say what you just said, Kaya, before that.
The collaboration is more effectively respond to mental health crisis regardless of location or time.
Or regardless of location or time, or of time or location. And utilizing community resources.
Yes.
How's that? I got a thumbs up from Al. I'm gonna mark this day. This is November 4th.
I think that we need to explicitly state that we need have a person. And 24/7 is problematic, I understand. I think ensuring that youth, whether it's, UCS, that'll be a select board thing. I think having this policy dictate that we need to have a person on call 24/7 might be the way to go. I think that's
But, the dilemma is that we do that now, but we haven't regular. I perceive anyway, and this is, that that it doesn't seem as regular. And Asher, as much as I'd like to do that,
Right.
that's really not our call here in this location. I agree that one of the ways to reach this goal is for the select board to appropriate money that would go to a series of persons, because there won't be one person who's going to be on call, but it would be either an agency. But that's not something that the PD could do.
Right.
And it's not something that this policy for the PD can do. I agree with your idea, but that doesn't mean this is the place to put it.
It could be in the notes to the policy that we send to the select board.
Absolutely, and
In the
thank you. That's a good suggestion. There are notes that we can send
I like that.
to the select board, because they're gonna eventually enact this policy. One of the ways to make this policy work is to enter into some kind of agreement.
Isn't
With an
that
agency.
person already in existence through UCS? I mean, they have 24/7 on-call people.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes.
We're not like asking for something else. We're asking to utilize what we have.
Right. But maybe if there's a perception that it's not being utilized as much as it could be, then we need to, then our policy base, if this is the policy, forces the PD to collaborate with all of those agencies, DCF, UCS, Sunrise, PAVE, that would more effectively respond to mental health crises. And it might also push UCF, for example, it might also push in that collaboration, UCS to find a better way to work with the PD. I don't know, right? It would work both ways, wouldn't it, Kay?
Yeah, but I know that, and I know that police leadership is really interested in working more closely with us, and I know that we've discussed embedding workers into the station, so it's not something that we don't want, all of us want. We're just trying to figure out ways to make it happen. I think
Yeah.
this policy will give the police and agencies the support they need, so if they do need to go to the select board, they can say, this is our policy.
Right.
To make, it gives them some power to sort of make some of the changes they're
Yeah.
wanting to make.
I hear you. I like it. That's a good way to say it. Let's move on to a deep, does this help our C? I mean, do we feel good about that?
It's really good.
I think this is substantially better than either of the two models that we've received, so.
Right, that's going to be a no.
And I'm wondering, my fourth was on reporting. And it's probably David, you can help me more with this it's probably along the lines of what we've said before, but we were talking about post-incident reports or post-incident reporting
Evaluations.
and evaluating. So how did we do? Where did this work?
So right now, pretty much every single report has an informal review of it, because
Right.
at our level, someone above us is approving our reports and someone above that level is approving our reports.
Sure.
So everything that is being articulated or narrated in that report goes up the chain to the eyes of our supervisors.
Sure.
So if there are any issues or any adjustments or points of conversation that they feel need to be made, they would do that during that process. So they would come up to me and afterwards, after they review my report, they would come up to me and maybe sidebar me and say, hey Dan, just so you know, I saw you went to this call yesterday, this is what happened, maybe next time do it a little bit different, or maybe call these people ahead. Just little notes here and there. Like I said, it's already an informal practice anyway.
Right.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is you want something like grand rounds, where they meet and they talk about, this went right, and this is what we did, and this went wrong, and how can we improve next time? So it's almost like a review.
And instead of a one-to-one, I mean, what I'm hearing is, instead of that happening, I get how it goes up and comes back down, and it may do that. But sometimes it may be, I guess, what I've heard, the
You're
encouragement.
probably talking more of like a larger formal debriefing of the situation. It would be a little bit hard to do, like I said, with the volume
Sure.
of these types of calls that we get on a daily basis.
Right.
It would be very hard to meet after every situation to go over exactly how things are handled, especially because a lot of times it's we respond to a suicidal person, we go there, we de-escalate the situation, render any aid if needed, and then move them along to the next service to help them, whether that be take them directly to the ER for UCS to evaluate them, or have UCS respond right to the scene once everything is safe. I mean, these types of things happen almost on a daily basis. So
Right.
to be able to have a formal whole department huddle over every single one of these, I don't
Right.
think that would be very reasonable.
No, it wouldn't.
Would it be a bad thing? No,
It's not
but it
lit-
comes down to time and.
Right, it's not even logistically possible.
Yeah.
That that's why I'm gonna ask for something slightly not that far out on the spectrum, but someplace perhaps, and it may be that we don't end up with a D, that's perfectly okay with me, I don't care. But it would seem to me that there are occasions that where a post-mortem, if you will, a debriefing of that particular scenario, of that setting. And it may be just language that talks about, shall encourage supervisors to work with patrol officers in debriefing selected responses in order to improve response another time. And it may be something as allowing the supervisory team to select when that happens and how that happens. Now, I'm not interested in making a policy about something that they'll never do, but I am interested in encouraging that kind of selective review, if you will, without it being a personnel matter. It's just review of how did we, why did this one not turn out the way we thought it would?
Yep.
And if we can encourage that, maybe that's the word we want to do. You had, yes, Valerie.
A question, if I can ask you.
Sure.
Can you, without disclosing any confidentiality, unless the Bennington Police Department has 100% record of doing everything properly every single time, can you share with us a situation that occurred that could be construed as mishandling? And then what happens to that within the department other than the officer sends it up to the sergeant says, oh, you didn't do this right, or you definitely broke the law, or whatever it is that the sergeant replies. What happens at that point? Is that a learning experience?
There's different degrees to what mishandling. I mean, there's.
Well, you could give us an example.
I'm just gonna kind of broaden that out. So mishandling can be done by either I'm interacting with someone and I say something wrong and it offends them and they end up afterwards making a complaint to our supervisors and it comes into that form. There's mishandling where I don't abide by a policy, like if I respond to a suicidal person and I just go and say, hey, I heard you were suicidal, you want to kill yourself, you're good, right? All right, I'm out of here. Stuff like that. There's that type of mishandling. And then there's mishandling where the law would be broken or something like that. So there's different degrees of that. The complaint stuff would be handled by, once the complaints come in, it gets reviewed and see if there's any validity to it and the appropriate action gets taken. So it's hard to answer your question specifically because of how fluid everything can be or how many different directions everything can be at the same time.
So
Well, I'm
let's,
only asking if, let's take a more serious incident.
Yep.
That the law was broken or there's a questionable action on the part of an officer, does that become something that's kept private, or does that become something that, without mentioning names, is shared with everyone so that they can be aware and improve?
So that's what I would come up to, like for a random example that's not even true, but what I'm kind of thinking that you might be thinking of is something, we respond to something like this and it turns into a use of force and things go south a little bit. How that type of thing would be handled would be directed from the supervisors to that specific officer or whoever was responding, whether it be another supervisor or whatever. Someone up higher on the chain of command would review that and go over that with that person that was involved. From there, it's kind of up to the supervisors to see if that was an individual problem or if it's a problem department-wide. That would kind of make it the supervisor's call, and if it's a department-wide thing, the book's open on how that would be handled, whether it just be an email saying, hey, make sure we're following this policy, this is the policy, here it is, or whether it's a noted thing that really needs work and maybe they find training for the whole department to go to. There's a really big range of reactions to what could happen.
And if they break the law, could be, still go to the state's attorney.
Yes, yeah, if we got to that degree, then,
Yeah,
then
that
yeah,
would-
but if it was like a mental health crisis and just the officer didn't handle it well verbally to try to de-escalate things and amp things up, that would kind of be a personnel issue. That would get handled somehow in-house.
Right. So, let me, in this, again, this may not be even necessary at this stage of the game. Because we know that there's already reporting, and there isn't any place to report. I'm loath to try to create another reporting thing for the PD to do, because right now they're loaded with enough reporting. I'm just wondering, is there a place in the policy to encourage supervisory personnel to utilize active incidents to further the training of law enforcement officers in the use of or in their response to people in mental health crises? Is there a place?
So I don't know if there would be a place for that in a policy per se.
That's what I want to know.
It would kind of just be a way of supervising. It would kind of be up to the supervisors to,
That's
all
what I
right,
want
let's
to
gather some information on stuff that's been going on
And it's
work
what
to
the
see if
sergeants
things can be adjusted.
probably, or
I know
lieutenants would do
I'm not
anyway.
part of it because I'm not a supervisor, but there are monthly supervisor meetings. What happens in that room during that time, I have no idea. But there are
Right.
monthly meetings that take
Right.
place and discussions on what directions things need to go.
Yeah. Do we need anything else besides the A, B, and C under the policy?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, now that we've had a discussion. Go ahead.
Would it be helpful to have, just so the community knows how we're doing, to have more of a process that will, I'm losing words, to provide information to the department and others about mental health crises. I mean, there are a lot of situations that you come up with, but we don't have that as a specific data point. And I don't know if it would be helpful. I just throw it.
And to whom would we report that?
It would be an internal thing. It would also be something that would go to the select board so that we know, do we have a community that's prepared to deal with, 75% of the calls of mental health crises?
Actually, that's the one piece that we have not touched on, is the sort of community education piece, and that was yours, as I recall. If in fact that many people are calling, for instance, 911, and they should be calling,
Yes, the local police department, which none of us know by heart, but we can,
Yeah.
you know.
right, yes.
I was saying, I know the phone number by heart.
Yes, I suspect you do. I wish it was as nice as just calling 511 or 211 or something, but anyway, so that if you have a person in, I'm not sure that we can give the Bennington PD that responsibility, that's the thing.
It might be just 2 months, but it would
It
be
is.
helpful for us to know, really, to be clear about the extent of the situation so that we know if we have the resources in our community and the capacity to deal with it.
Can we put that as a note to the select board? Because I think that's a whole town-wide thing, and I do think it's an important point, absolutely. And I also think that it is the case, having spoken with both the chief and the lieutenant, that sometimes people will call the PD when they really shouldn't be calling the PD at all. That's the reality they're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's part of the community
And the reality
education.
is, even UCS, we do a ton of outreach and advertisement and talk to people, but until and unless you need the service,
Right. It doesn't.
it doesn't stick with you.
Yep. So let's make that another note to the select board. And not that the select board may have any grand skills on how to answer that question, but I think it's an important question. Particularly if we're talking about utilization of police resources,
Yeah.
right?
I would love to see just a D about community education and to help educate the community about when and how to contact, who to contact in the event of
A mental health crisis?
yeah.
So let's try our language, just don't write anything down yet. So if we were to say that the Bennington Police Department shall assist in efforts to educate the community about who to call and how to call, who to call when a person is in a mental health experiencing a mental health crisis.
Something like that.
So is that really the BPD's responsibility?
That was going to be my first
Well,
I just
question.
don't think that that's their primary responsibility.
No, probably not, but I think if it came from the Bennington Police Department, people would listen to it.
But is that really rise to the level of a policy? Or can it be dealt with
Yeah.
at sea?
I agree that would be a great thing to do, but I also am not sure that I would want to put that in, I put it in as laissez-faire language as I could think of, assist in educating the community. And it still sounded like something I don't want Dan to be spending a ton of his time on, and the chief and the lieutenant have as much time, they're doing as much as they can possibly do right now. So how is that going to happen?
Anything all that would happen would be if someone called the police and we
I
wanted to
think
recommend
this
that they call someone else.
this is more of a town-wide select board kind of thing than everyone's responsibility rather than just the police, because that's not the only place people's mental health crises go. So maybe it's something they look at as town-wide.
It would be information that you'd have to somehow get into every single home in the town, because I know from experience, they don't know the number to something, so they'll just call the police department to figure it out where they're,
I know. And luckily the dispatchers are pretty good, or whoever answers is pretty good at trying to figure that
Like
out.
I know just for instance, last night, they called our midnight dispatcher wondering what the election results were. They call the police department for that. Like it's,
Okey-dokey.
no, it was during midnight hour, so.
Holy moly. Okay, yeah,
Those are the types of things that
right.
happen.
I know, yeah, exactly. Let's hold off on that.
Yeah.
Can we just go back up and delete
Yes.
everything from after the word policy in that section? I know this is going to seem silly, but it actually,
No, it's good.
it's the procedures in this one that make so much more sense. Good. So we've done that. Let's go down. I think we've got,
She had her hand raised now.
oh, sorry,
All
Donna.
right, I'm still kind of stuck on this post-incident evaluation, so I have a sentence here that if anybody agrees with me, I'd love to hear it.
Okay.
Regarding utilization review, encourage supervisory staff to critique significant mental health, what are we calling this, visits? Responses for possible additional training to officers.
What was the verb?
I don't know which one, which
Critique.
verb you want.
The first one. The first.
Encourage.
Encourage.
So encourage,
Say it again now.
encourage supervisory police department staff, because
Right.
Dan said they're the ones reviewing all this,
Yep.
to critique significant mental health events, whatever word.
Or responses.
Responses for possible additional training to officers. Meaning that if something really bad happened, and only 2 guys knew about it, the rest of the group could know about it, or we could ask them, it doesn't mean they're gonna do it, but.
I think that's what B does.
What's that?
Look, they already talk about training in B. I'm sure that it's how should
Well, then maybe we could just tack it on there. What I'm concerned about is so many times routines get to be the same routine no matter what industry you're in.
Yeah.
And if you don't have some sort of QA or utilization review or something that brings it to the surface that, hey, this happened a bunch of times and we keep making the same mistake.
Yeah.
That was what my thinking was. If you critique, in the heat of the moment, people do what they're supposed to do, probably do it right, and then they move on. And if you don't bring it back to, in some way, learn from it, you sometimes repeat the same mistakes.
I get your concern, and I'm wrestling with whether it's
I wouldn't care where it went, I just thought if we could bring it in there somehow.
I guess I could say that that's just a general management
that's where I
principle. Why would
see
we
that.
put in a
That's
specific policy about mental health? But that's just, I didn't think it hurts anything, but also don't think it belongs here.
I kind of like it. I mean, I think it does encourage interdepartment conversations about situations.
okay.
It
Okay.
and, yeah,
You
I
want to
mean,
weigh in on that? Did you hear the suggestion? It's basically a suggestion. It's an encouragement to utilize what might be major responses to people in mental health crisis to further identify places where training is necessary. And it's the use of what I would hope would be regular management skills, but it is a place here where we're asking, in many ways, we're asking officers to do just the opposite of what they would normally do in a different kind of situation, which is, for example, as we've read through almost everything, being forceful and being loud or being whatever is exactly what you don't want to do. So we want to make sure that the normative doesn't overtake the needed in a particular area. Does that make sense?
That just comes up for our training
I do,
anyway.
I'm just,
We're
I
trained
think I'm
on
struggling with
situations like
policy
this
versus
to
procedure,
approach
Yep.
it in certain ways.
because that feels much more like a procedure and something.
It does feel more like a procedure to me, and that's why I think it's, as much as I'd like to encourage that, and
We could put it as a
Because I
note
think
again.
that could fall under, really honestly, we could put another sentence under C and say, something like, encourage the use of your interagency team meetings to review problematic cases.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So.
Well, I would-
C, I'm sure you have a word.
yeah, and I'm thinking, without getting too into the weeds and see, I'm right now putting it down as a note for the select board, but it may be a place that the select board will, it might be that the select board will eventually end up putting that in.
Truth be told, we've all seen television in the major cities where
Yes,
all these incidents have occurred,
right,
and they're never the first time. I like to call it the tip of the iceberg.
true. And
Well, they never
one of
are.
the things that I think that's absolutely true. One of the things I like to think about in terms of the different, I mean, I've worked with a large city police department. And the number of officers there is extremely different than 25.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with 250 officers or 2,500 officers and 25 officers, the management of those 25 is exceptionally different.
Sure, and we're lucky, but, you know.
We are, but I'm with you on the use of, I mean, as a lawyer, we always did this with all the work that we did. So we didn't make the same mistake the third time.
That might even be a suggestion for something more statewide. Like you said, it's way different to handle 25 officers, where in the entire state of Vermont, there's about 12 to 1,300 officers
Yeah,
with all of the agencies combined. So that might be something more of the level of the Criminal Justice Training Council
yep,
to review and take a look at all of the,
No, sorry.
take a look at all of the incidents that have occurred within the last year or
Yep.
whatever, and have them review it and see if there's training, since all the training goes through them anyway.
Right.
Whether it's, even if it's just for me, it still has to get approved by the state level training council, that it's something that's okay, and they will accept that I went to it. It's not just, like, I can't just go to his house and he talks to me
Right.
about mental health for a minute. I can't submit a training form saying I got trained on this,
Right.
because it's not a recognized training. So
Yep.
all of the training goes through them anyway, so that's probably,
It
that
may
would be
be
my
a place
suggestion,
where
is
that-
to make it
Yeah.
up to that level.
and, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to make you aware that we are at about 8 minutes or 7 minutes before 4. And we have not touched definitions. Now, I understand that under the definition section, there may be any number of these that we will just delete. I get all of that, but I am interested in, do we continue with this, or do we move on to definitions?
Move on to definitions and come back, we need to.
And
We have 5-6 minutes. I will have to leave pretty close to 4 o'clock.
Okay.
So,
And you have to leave, so we have at least 2 of us who have to leave close to 4 o'clock. So let's see if we can move down to, do we need a definition for persons of diminished capacity? I would say no, but,
Bruce, I just suggest that people think, I looked through these, I mean, some of this might affect the procedure definitions, but that's not what we're doing.
No.
I think the 2 definitions we need, well, 1 definition we need is mental health crisis.
yes,
But the IACP has that, but it also refers to mental illness, which is why they also have the mental illness definition. So I
Right.
would say that those 2 definitions are probably the only ones we need for the policy section.
I would also suggest that, we could have something that says that under D, the one that says, I don't think we need to say anything about E, voluntary and involuntary commitments. I don't think that's, but professional resources,
I think that's community resources.
and I would change that to community resources. These are available to police such as mental health professionals, emergency medical facilities, detox centers, and that are included but are not limited to, basically. So those are community resources.
Why not tie C and A together, since those are both describing a person in crisis?
Is that, see, if we actually use the IACP definition, and I think you may have seen, you should have seen that one. It talks about a mental health crisis, and then
I really don't like mentally ill person.
I don't either. And I think we can, if you'll trust me, I will come up with language. Remember, you're gonna see this before it goes to anywhere else. Can we get rid of mentally ill, dangerous person too? I mean, we're gonna get rid of these?
Yeah.
I don't think we need that.
No.
So we're gonna delete that. We're gonna get to delete prosecution guidelines. I don't think there's anything. We can delete voluntary and involuntary commitments. And stop me if you think we're wrong.
Why are we deleting that?
Because it's not referenced anywhere.
It's not referenced in the policy anywhere because
Oh,
we need a
okay.
definition.
that's statutory and we don't need to worry about what's statutory.
Okay, I agree.
Does that make sense?
Yep,
Okay.
just want to be sure it's not.
No, there's certain things they can't do anyway. Let's go back up to C. Can we get, I don't think we need to define mentally ill person. We can define what a mental illness is, and that's actually defined in the IACP one. And rather than the language of B, it would say, an impairment of an individual's normal cognitive, emotional, or behavioral functioning caused by physiological or psychosocial factors. A person may be affected by mental illness if they display an inability to think rationally, blah, 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 exercise adequate control of their over behavior or impulses, and or take responsible care of their welfare with regard to basic provisions of clothing, food, shelter, or safety. That's the IACP one, and a much more updated definition than what is talking about behaviors that are outside the norm, which I don't like that language at all. Are we in agreement that we can utilize the IACP definition?
Yeah, that was 2018, so it's pretty current.
Yeah, it was. So we're gonna,
I would almost rather,
yes,
honestly, we can leave it, it's really big tech semantics.
Okay.
With-
remember, Kaya, you can come back to me when you get this and make any suggestion, and if it's substantive, I will share it with the group,
Okay.
okay?
So for mental,
So,
we can just delete the definition.
yeah,
Say
you,
substitute IACP policy, and we'll take, Bruce and I'll take care of that.
yeah. So we're gonna substitute the two definitions from the IACP. Both mental health crisis and mental illness. Yeah,
So we're not going
just
to,
IACP.
we're not going to define a person
Or
or,
diminished capacity?
well, obviously with different language than that, but defining, because we mentioned multiple times a person experiencing mental health crisis.
Right.
I think we should just include, in addition to talking about drug use. Oh, okay.
Just double check. So our perception will be, and again, you're all gonna see this in about sometime early next week. So the definitions that we'll end up with are a mental health crisis, mental illness, and community resources.
That's good.
And I think that's probably all the ones we need.
Can I just say on the community resources, I think somebody already said this, but you want to add more things than what's listed.
Right, what I will actually say is, those sources that are available to the police, such as but not limited to,
Okay,
and then mental health professionals.
because you got the 211, you got all kinds of things.
Oh, you got all kinds of things, so we're not gonna try to, the problem with making a list is
You might miss some.
you miss them. So, you will notice that our work stops with the 5 asterisks there at line 3, or 6 asterisks. The reasoning is that from that point on, and interestingly enough, a lot of what goes on after this is really about tactics of containment, coordination, communication, and time. It's and it's actually, I think, fairly close to what the PD, from my conversation with the chief this last week, it's fairly close to what they're doing now, or if it's not exactly so. So we can, I think, I want to thank you, it's 4 o'clock. I want to thank you for your attention. We did much more in 3 hours than I thought we were going to be able to do. I will include with the draft my notes for the select board. And you feel free to communicate that back to me about what, expanding or whatever, because we can do that. These will eventually, the policies will be addressed to the select board eventually anyway. And I know there's a number of these issues that are around this. I do want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time, your talents. Again, I'm incredibly impressed by the folks who volunteered to do this work. And I actually think we ended up with something substantially superior to what what the Vermont League of Cities and Towns currently has as a model.
Yes.
So thank you.
Very good work, and thank you for leading us.
Thank you. Good work, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe,
Thank you.
stay happy, breathe,